So now that you've had a little time to think about it and process it, like, what does Mac Jones being behind center mean for the fantasy prospects of, like, other New England skill players? So, Geoff, does anyone get a bump here?
Yeah, so we talked about Damien Harris yesterday, and I mean, that's the most obvious one. Obviously, Cam Newton taking a ton of red zone touches last year, more than all the RBs combined. But I think the guy who you really should be keeping an eye on here is Jakobi Meyers. This dude's only 24. I'm sure for Patriots fans, it feels like Jakobi Meyers has been there for like half a century already. But this is a player who led them in catches last year. And New England, as a team, threw the second fewest passes last year. We know that's not going to be the case this year. There's no way they're going to be second last in pass attempts per game. Jakobi Meyers is solidified. He outplayed Nelson Aguilar for most of the preseason. I think this guy slides right into the Julian Edelman role, quite frankly, that Josh McDaniels has made a very good PPR target. You could see a guy like Meyers, by the end of the season, people are starting him in their wide receiver 3 spots. I think for PPR formats especially, Jakobi Meyers has a lot of fantasy value right now, especially where he's being taken in drafts.
All right, AJ, what do you think? Who gets a bump?
And I just say everybody, like literally, I think everybody here. We talked about why Damien Harris gets a bump. Well, if Cam Newton's not taking the red zone touches here, could James White get an additional share on maybe third down, something like that? Absolutely. I think Aguilar, Myers, Bourne, like all these guys are going to get more targets, I think, with the traditional pocket passer in Mac Jones, or more traditional pocket passer in Mac Jones. I'll even toss in Hunter Henry here. A rookie is going to lean on somebody like that that's a tight end on kind of short crossing routes. They're a little bit easier to figure out the defense and everything. So while I'll say everybody, and I totally agree with Geoff on Jakobi Meyers, I think Hunter Henry is maybe the one guy that would see maybe the biggest uptick in targets that he otherwise wouldn't have.
All right, guys, in other big news, the Saints released veteran running back DEVONTA Freedom. So, AJ, how does that impact the usage in the Saints backfield? And, do you think Freeman fits in anywhere else in the league right now?
Well, I'm not sure where else he could fit in. I think he'll find somewhere. Obviously, guys are going to get hurt and banged up, so there'll be a spot for him. I'm not exactly sure where that'll be. But as far as the team goes, look, the heavy workload was always going to be carried by Alvin Kamara. So the news doesn't really change much there in terms of how their offense is going to run here. Between the rest of the guys, I do think it could be more opportunities for Tony Jones. I think he outperformed Latavius Murray during training camp. He wasn't a big pass-catching guy in college, so I don't think he's going to take a share of third down passing opportunities. I think those still go to Kamara. Maybe they would have gone to Devonta Freeman a little bit. But Kamara is just going to get his touches no matter what, and that doesn't really change with this.
Geoff, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, as far as Devonta Freeman goes, I mean, this could be the last stop for him. So I don't think we need to spend much time there. The Saints have an interesting backfield for sure. I think Latavius Murray's still locked in that power back role. He's a very talented player, and the Saints like him. They've been able to rely on him in big situations, even when Kamara's been down. So I don't think you're going to see him get supplanted. But Tony Jones Jr. and even Dwayne Washington, we could say, although I think Washington is clearly RB4 there right now. I think Tony Jones Jr. becomes interesting from the fact if one of those guys got hurt. If Kamara went down, you'd probably see Jones fit into more of the power back role. And maybe even if Murray goes down, or maybe they both go down, because it's running back in the NFL. Things can happen. Jones Jr. definitely is a guy the Saints are pretty high on right now. He's looked good in the preseason. So not really someone you need to consider, for season-long drafts right now. Maybe you're in a dynasty league. Maybe you're just playing DFS and you just want to, keep an eye on if that depth chart starts to fluctuate. Tony Jones Jr. with the Devonta Freeman obviously release is all of a sudden, locked into that 3 role.
Okay, Geoff, aside from Newton Freeman, were there any other surprise cuts for you?
Yeah, John Brown of the Vegas Raiders. I mean, this one was, everyone was touting him as the guy. Oh, he's going to replace Nelson Aguilar. Nelson Aguilar led the Raiders in targets last year among all wide receivers. This guy's also a speedy wide receiver. We've seen him perform well in certain spots, especially with the Bills. Didn't even make the team. And this has big news, because you look down the Raiders wide receiver chart. And okay, Henry Ruggs, everyone likes him. He's a first-round draft pick. Bryan Edwards, their second pick from last year, wide receiver. People just forget about him. This guy's been highly touted all preseason. He's locked into a starting role. The Raiders are so comfortable with Bryan Edwards, they didn't even play him in the preseason, basically. So I really feel like Bryan Edwards has a ton of value right now. He's more suited to the wide receiver one role than Henry Ruggs, who's more of a speed guy. I think the John Brown release speaks huge volumes to how confident the Raiders are with Bryan Edwards. And I think this guy's probably going to lead their wide receiver crew in touches. So just like I said with Jakobi Meyers, you could be starting this guy as a wide receiver 3 in your season-long fantasy drafts by the end of the year. It might even be sooner with Bryan Edwards because there's really no one else there. He doesn't have to vault over anyone on the depth chart. Obviously, Darren Waller's there, but I think that John Brown release was big news for Bryan Edwards' fantasy value.
AJ, what about you? Any other surprise cuts for you?
Outside of Brown, the other guy for me was Brashad Perriman for Detroit. Obviously, we're not expecting a ton out of the Lions this year, but I do think there are still opportunities in DFS to maybe look at some of their wide receivers. And so for me, obviously the biggest news is that Tyrell Williams appears to have cemented himself as the number one guy here and should get the lion's share, no pun intended, of the targets here without Perriman in the mix. The rest of the depth chart kind of slots in more, honestly, as number 3 guys. So it's going to be a matter of who can step up as the number 2 here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, Quintez Cephas, all guys that could push for that number 2 spot that essentially I think is being vacated by Perriman being cut. I wouldn't be surprised to see him land somewhere. This is a guy, 500 yards receiving in each of the last 2 seasons, a combined 9 touchdowns, like not a huge impact guy, but could land as a 3, 4, 5, depending on the team. Injuries could obviously play a factor in where he lands as well.
We forgot the biggest news from Detroit, too. They're going kickerless this year, Jesse. They cut both their kickers.
Yeah. Open tryouts? You guys going to head out and try?
And it's not that far for me. I might as well head on over. They need somebody.
Yeah, we'll send some cameras to make sure that we get that on video. All right, in non-cut news, but another Saints-related story, wide receiver Michael Thomas will start the season on the PUP list as he's not yet ready to return after that off-season ankle surgery. So, AJ, do you think this opens up an opportunity for someone else on the receiving corps to make an early season statement, maybe carve out a bigger role for themselves?
Absolutely. And the guy I look at is Marquez Callaway. He saw a significant uptick in snaps last year during the final 2 games of the season when Thomas was out. They had Emmanuel Sanders at the time. He's gone. So Callaway is pretty much a lock for the number 2 spot heading into week 1. And then we also have to consider the fact that Tre'Quan Smith wasn't at practice yesterday. So if Tre'Quan Smith were to miss even just 1 week against, the week 1 against the Packers, that means Marquez Callaway is going to be their top guy here, and definitely a player to watch. I think his value has taken a huge bump. And then obviously, Thomas will come back, probably not week 7, week 8 maybe, depending on how quickly he can ramp up. And, that'll take a hit on Callaway's fantasy value. But by that point, you've really capitalized on it. He has a chance to lock himself in as the number 3. Or perhaps if Smith does miss any time, Callaway becomes the number 2.
All right, Geoff, what do we think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm done with touting Tre'Quan Smith as having any chance of being a legit wide receiver one. It's a player who didn't have Michael Thomas in the lineup for over half the season last year. His biggest game, he went over 60 yards receiving once. So the Tre'Quan Smith train is left for me. I think Marquez Callaway is going to actually be the wide receiver one there. And it's not like I'm super high on Callaway just from a physical perspective. He's basically Mr. Average in terms of a wide receiver, 4.55, 6'2", 205 pounds. You look at what an average wide receiver coming out of the draft is, that's pretty much it. But the Saints like him, and the biggest thing is the depth chart. He's only got Tre'Quan Smith to go over. I think you're going to see a lot of targets with Marquez Callaway. And even if he is Mr. Average, even if I'm right about that, he's looked pretty good in spots as well. So I think you're going to see Jameis Winston throwing the ball a lot to Marquez Callaway. Is it going to work out every game? Probably not, because it's going to see some pretty good coverage. But in the volume when they're down, I think Marquez Callaway could be a guy who would just sit back at the end of the year and be like, this guy got 120, 140 targets. Because who else are they going to throw the ball to there? They even got Adam Troutman banged up. So yeah, to me, the big winner there is Callaway, and I don't even know if it's worth talking about anyone else there.